Taste of the Unexplainable by Don D. Corcel. For those of you who have never experienced anything like I've described in Chapter 1, let me tell you, firstly, these things are real. They do happen. And secondly, the experience leaves your head spinning. You keep asking yourself, how did that just happen? Let's think about this for a minute. What did just happen? I'm not an expert at these things, but I do have some ideas. It seemed we had contacted a freely available mental energy stream of some sort. I say freely available because we didn't have to work very hard to connect with it, and for lack of better terminology, I think I'll start using the word personality when I refer to it going forward. Because of the way the glass was moving, sometimes precise, sometimes searching, it gave the impression we were talking to several different personalities. But I should point out, they all had a very playful nature about them, which, incidentally, matched our personalities around the table. Now, I've heard of others having had bad experiences at this sort of thing, but ours was truly delightful. And just maybe, our personalities around the table had something to do with that. I started forming a theory. The personality and attitude you yourself bring to the table might be what you attract. There's something very mental going on here. While this tabletop setup is spelling things out in the real world, if you think about it, it had to originate somewhere in the mind. So, your mind is a contributor, and controlling your mind, suppressing your fears, and having an enjoyable attitude, I think, will affect results. Now, this next point seems important. The personality had no difficulty controlling the glass. Apparently, it could synchronize 2 to 4 people, moving the glass with a single finger with a high degree of precision. That ability certainly falls into the category of supernatural. If the personality were controlling us, and I did believe that it was, this hints at the personality's powers of coordination and mental control. After you experience something like this, you keep asking yourself, did that really happen? Or alternatively, was somebody in the room deliberately controlling the glass? That question for me was certainly answered later on, when the glass was moving so quickly we could barely watch it, let alone control it with the precision we were seeing. And by the end of that session, I was convinced we had contacted something truly astounding, something out of this world. I was really excited about it. Here's another thing. The personality had no difficulty perceiving us. While we didn't see it, it could see our hands, the glass, the letters on the table, and understand our questions, said out loud. But I started to wonder later whether it actually heard our questions or whether it read our minds. If the personality was composed of mental energy, say, and that was my best guess at the moment, then maybe it operated solely in the mental world. It wouldn't need to see our room, table, glass, or hear what's said if it could tap directly into our minds and get the information it needs. Another factor I thought was interesting was the way it introduced itself as Zoroaster. I learned that name in a history class about a week earlier, which made me wonder if the personality just said and spelled things extracted from our minds. Was it just regurgitating information laying around in our simple-minded brains? Maybe. But it chose to represent itself as an ancient spiritual leader. But if that name came from my mind, why choose that name? Maybe the personality related to it in some way, and maybe this hints at how the personality views itself. Interesting, isn't it? So those are all my points and theories for the moment. Let's get back to the story in progress. Chapter 2. Later that summer, I discovered an old Ouija board in our basement, buried under a heap of dust-covered boxes. I dug it free, dusted it off, and wondered whether it might work better than the upside-down glass. Inside the box was a smooth board with the letters of the alphabet and the numbers 0 through 9 printed on it. The words yes and no appeared in opposite corners. Digging further in the box, I found a heart-shaped pointer, or planchette as it's called. When I placed it on the board, it slid with hardly any friction. The contact points were covered with felt. Wow! Eager to try it out, I drove over to John's house one evening. We sat facing each other, resting the board on our knees. I placed the planchette in the middle of the board, and we rested our fingers on it. I guess we were pros at this point, because we instinctively started moving the planchette around to get a feel for the arm movements involved. A few times the planchette fell off the edge of the board. We righted it, and continued testing until we maneuvered each and every letter. Finally, we looked at each other. Is there anybody out there who wishes to speak to us? I took the notes that evening and had a large pad and pencil by my side. Working the board and taking notes was a struggle. Every time we got a letter, I had to stop, pick up the pencil, pick up the pad, find out where I left off, write the letter down, pad and pencil down, and put both hands back on the planchette. Try writing a sentence with that rigmarole. Very tiring. But what was more troubling, I couldn't make out any words in the string of letters we'd received, and the text was starting to get pretty long. Amidst all this, I still had my concerns about foul play. I kept looking up at John to see what his interests were in the planchette's movements. At one point, I remembered chuckling. He seemed to have rolled his eyes into the top of his head, and it looked really silly. Despite my concerns, the letters were coming in just fine. The planchette seemed confident, like it knew what it was doing. But by the time I had taken nearly a full page of letters, my arms were starting to ache, and I had to stop. I told John, and he slowly opened his eyes. I picked up the pad and glanced down the page. There wasn't a single recognizable word. Not even in the beginning, where you'd expect to see something obvious. What if none of this made sense? Did we spend the last 30 minutes recording gibberish? I felt touches of frustration, practically desperate to find a single recognizable word. Almost ready to give up, I spotted something that might be a word. It was in the middle of the page. T-H-O-U. Thou. Sort of an old-fashioned English word. I tried, but I couldn't make it into a longer word. The letters before and after didn't spell anything. So I guess that's it then. Thou. I drew vertical lines on either side of the word as separators. Then I tried working backward and forward from that point. Incredibly, this form of decoding worked. First the previous word, then the word before that, and so on, all the way to the beginning, and then to the end. How bizarre! Yet even now, I still had no idea what the message said. At last, I read the text out loud. It was curious. The words were an awkward, unusual-sounding form of English. If we tried, we could understand it, but the spellings were different and sounded unfamiliar. No wonder I couldn't decode this on first sight. Fascinating. Reading on, I noticed something else. A rhyming scheme was emerging. My whole body shuddered as I realized this was a poem in Old English. I took a deep breath and continued. It was about a fisherman casting his nets into the deep. And there was a spiritual message to it. The fisherman was trying to catch souls, lift them from the depths, and raise them to a heavenly place. When I got to the end of the page, my heart sank. Oh no, we only captured the very beginnings of this incredible masterpiece. Oh my God! This certainly was a different experience from the previous ones. This time, the message blew us away. Clearly, there was only one personality involved, and the message was so complex we had to go through an elaborate decoding process just to bring it out. I realized something later on. The degree of confidence we had in the reception process proved important. Think about it. We wouldn't have had the patience to receive a full page of meaningless letters without a good deal of confidence. And maybe John and I went a bit further this time, mentally. This time we didn't ask any questions of the personality. We just surrendered our understanding right from the start. And look, the quality improved. There are 2 points here. Since tonight's results were better than anything we'd received before, I started to wonder, did our earlier questions limit or confine our results? And secondly, I had a strong suspicion that John's meditative attitude helped, which partially confirmed my theory, that people's attitudes in the room helped shape the results. The subject of the fisherman saving souls was deeply inspirational for both of us, and we savored that feeling. Yet another taste of the unexplainable. The personality didn't engage us in back-and-forth conversation this time. We simply received a carefully crafted poem, and that's all. Since neither John nor myself were knowledgeable in ancient poetry, this clearly proved the personality was drawing on information sources other than our minds. This meant this kind of communication was not only real, but arguably had great value. It had communicated with sophistication this time, and used knowledge beyond our understanding. I lost track of that poem over the years, but I remember the unusual spellings of the words. Recently, with the help of the internet, I learned this style of writing is called Middle English. And here's a short example, written by Chaucer. To experience all this as a teenager was both mind-boggling and formative. I had to wonder why science hadn't put this to more practical use. This was amazing.